I've been really looking forward to the open online briefings of this week, not least because there's such a lot going on in the world of COVID, but such a lot going on in the world of development. And today, what I'd like to do is to start with the messaging that I've been doing for the last 2 weeks on getting ready for COVID, living with COVID, and getting ahead of COVID. But I also really want to focus on how we can use the energy and strength that we gain from our ability to deal with this ongoing health hazard when we're also dealing with a lot of other hazards, including the destruction of nature, including really very unsatisfactory food systems that don't nourish and keep people healthy at the level they could, including a climate emergency that is becoming more pronounced each week, and then the constant challenge of inequity, of migration, and of warfare, violent warfare, which just undermines so much of what's happening in our world. And I want to stress that COVID is a challenge that we can, as humanity, get ahead of. It's within our powers. We have the knowledge, we have the connections. And it's the same as these other challenges that we're dealing with, that are perhaps more familiar, but which need the same concerted effort. And I personally, I'm just not going to give up. I'm not going to say it's too difficult. I'm not going to say that the political leadership in our world is not geared to dealing with these really complex existential challenges. I want to turn it the other way around, and I want to say, yes, humanity is capable of doing this. And hundreds of millions of people all over the world are responding to COVID like they're responding to so many other issues. And actually, that everybody has it within them to get on top of these threats. And our job is to find ways to make sure that leaders recognize that this is in their people's interests and it's what their people want. Because nobody in the world wants to be living with constant threats of disease that we could get ahead of. Nobody wants to be dealing with an overshooting planet, an overheating planet, a planet that's at war, or a planet that is destroying nature faster than nature is recovering itself. In fact, we should stop destroying nature. So I want to put our COVID work into context. And I hope that in our discussion now and in the coming weeks and months, we can continue to do that. Because as I say in these briefings, each time we meet, we are the leaders. Nobody else is going to do it for us. We can't wait around for others to do it. We have to take it for ourselves and do it in all our walks of life, with all those with whom we connect, because it's up to us. So in the first part of today, I'd like to acknowledge the team. I'd like to welcome Chris Shipton, who is our wonderful graphic artist who's going to give us visual illustrations. And I'd like to quickly just welcome Tui, just to ask her to give us any opening remarks that she'd like to as we get into our session today. Tui, you have the floor.
Welcome everyone, and welcome. I see a few new names there. What I'll start off with is a poll. So I'm going to launch that now, and I invite you to answer these 3 questions with us. It helps us understand who's on the call. So starting with the first question, please share where you're from by region. Then your age range, as we like to make sure that we're engaging with people from all different age ranges. And then our last question is our way of trying to understand the mood of the room. which is something that we miss from in-person meetings. So this is our virtual way of understanding how you're all feeling. It's based on an emotional guidance scale from top to bottom. And please do feel free to tick more than one answer here. So please feel free to keep answering as David continues, and then we will share the results of the poll later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tree. I just want to check that I'm audible. I've just managed to slightly make a mistake with my sound system, but we're great. I heard you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Catherine. Chris, you are so welcome, and we look forward so much to seeing what you've got. I'm glad that you've already linked together climate emergency, destruction of nature, and as you say, war and inequality. You know, these are the existential issues that are going to be dominating the world that our children and their children are inheriting. And it is our job to focus on these and not to do it in any kind of manner that might appear to be inappropriate. You know, we are, after all, functioning within a world that has certain structures and customs to it, but we are also committed to making sure that it is a decent place for those who inherit it. And it's now with a view to COVID that I'm going in, and I want to start by just giving you the summary as of today, 25th of August, around the world. Hello, Carlos and Veronica. It's lovely to see you. You're beautifully on my screen. Wonderful. I'm going to just give you the situation. We have a continuing advance of COVID across the world, though if you believe the numbers, it's beginning to plateau. We've had pretty static figures of the new numbers of cases per week over the last 4 or 5 weeks. They're enormous numbers of cases, and we're up to a total of 23 million cumulative cases. But what I can say is that the data do not describe a continuing expansion in the numbers of new cases. However, we do know that these numbers are a terrible underestimate. We know that particularly in Africa, but also in parts of Southeast Asia and Latin America, not everybody who's got the virus is being tested. And that is also the case in other parts of the world as well. So we're dealing with a denominator, a total number that we can't really fully believe. And all the statistics that we have say that this virus continues to expand. We are seeing that death rates are not mushrooming up, particularly in Western Europe right now, even though cases are starting to rise. And many people are saying, has the virus changed? Has it become less vicious? Or has there been a shift in the capacity of humanity to deal with it? My basic view to everybody is that I'm continuing to take this virus really seriously. I'm continuing to work on the assumption that it is capable of killing a significant proportion of those who it infects. I'm also mindful of the fact that this long tail COVID is being increasingly recognized and is affecting between 5 and 10% of people. I'm also seeing more and more people saying that COVID in young children is not necessarily a completely benign process. And so I'm continuing to ask everybody, don't allow yourself to think that the virus is weakening. Don't form any conclusions at the moment about the overall nature of the world situation. Go on seeing this as a dangerous virus. And also, please make certain that when you're talking to others, if they say, oh, well, it's getting easier, it's getting softer, it's milder, and anyway, we've got other things to worry about. Say, yes, we've got other things to worry about, but we also have got to take this virus seriously and learn to get on with our lives and live with it as a constant threat. So, for example, just now in talking with BBC UK, preparing for something on Radio 5 coming out this evening, I've been asked, am I concerned that there are differences in positions about whether or not masks should be worn in schools between what's happening in Scotland and what's happening in England. Am I concerned that local authority leaders in England are developing different positions? And I'm saying, yeah, well, I am concerned about these differences, but I'm not surprised. Because, of course, everybody wants to show that they are better than others at dealing with COVID. But I'm saying, look, this is a problem affecting the whole world, 7.8 billion people. And frankly, it's not a competition. You know, there is no reason why people in one country will do better than people in another country. There is not a competition between nations. There instead is a whole world coming to terms with a new threat, and we all have to deal with it together. So I'm really trying to encourage an end to competitive behaviour on COVID and a recognition that we're all in it together, and then an understanding of what the basic principles are for dealing with them. So this is my line. It's the same as the line of Tedros, the Director General of WHO, who is so strong on it. He's saying, why compete when you're dealing with a common threat? And of course, it's right that we do this, and we have to do it. I have to do it, he has to do it, and I hope many of you are doing it. Because there's this bizarre wish by people just to compete all the time. And nobody has got the perfect answer. We all know that it's a mix of actions that are needed to get ahead of this virus. We all know that if there's inconsistency, things go wrong. We all know that there's new findings that will come clear about this virus that will make us even more wary of it. And we've all got to work together on them. So I said, I want everybody in schools to be protecting their faces and practicing physical distancing and doing good hygiene and staying away if they're sick. I totally understand why the new guidance from WHO, UNICEF and the International Academy of Pediatrics has said that children over 12 are fundamentally the same as adults and should practice the same face protection as adults. Of course, it makes good sense. Between 5 and 12, I think we can say that they too should be ready to adopt the adult pattern if they can, but they may find it hard to do. And under 5, I think it's fair to say they will find it very hard to do. And when the presenter said to me, well, do you think it's really worth the effort trying to get these children to do it? After all, they find it difficult to do. I say, children are great at hygiene. They're great at manners. They're great at not picking their noses. They can be perfectly good at masking, provided they know what the reason is. In fact, they'll be telling their parents how to do it. We know from masses of experience over the years, particularly from a program called Child to Child, developed by a community around a guy called David Morley, late David Morley, who made it clear that actually children are fabulous at helping their families to adopt healthy behaviours. They're uncompromising. Once they get the point, they will say, if there is a rule, let's all do it. And so I'm absolutely uncompromising myself. I think children have a role to play in helping us, not just what happens in the school, but helping us with what happens in the home, helping us with how parents should behave. And let's respect them for that. So that was today's interview just now. It was recorded. It goes out later today. But it's in keeping with the basic line I'm taking now, which is a line that says, life has to go on. Economies must continue. Hospitals must be able to function. Local government must function. Businesses have got to work. Community organizations must function. Households have to function. So let's try to stop pretending that we have options And let's instead apply what we know and make certain that it's fully applied so that we have a chance to get ahead of the virus together. Let's be assertive about getting COVID ready. Let's present it as the COVID ready challenge and challenge each other to get it right. And let's do it together, but with a focus on equity, which can be taken in many directions, but I'm really talking here about fairness and justice. But let's do it now. You know, I think I'm burning with frustration. Burning. I'm burning with frustration because I feel that each week, month, or 3 months, that we seem to still have governments just not pulling together is time lost for humanity. Actually, the global situation has some very interesting features to it that I'll just share. Number one, the numbers in India continue to rise, and they're also rising in Nepal and Bangladesh, less so in Pakistan. The Indian situation is rising because the virus is going into more rural areas. In Nepal, it's gone right through the Kathmandu Valley and into the whole of the lowland area on the border with India. In Bangladesh, it's everywhere, and the floods are hampering the response. And it's expanding in Africa, in Kenya, in West Africa, in Nigeria, Mali, in Southern Africa too. And it's expanding in Latin America, but it's slow. And I think that it's great that it's not moving so fast. And I think this is because populations everywhere are coming to terms with the need to act together equitably and now. And this is great. So as we lay the groundwork for the global campaign, I just give you bits from the narrative that I'm doing that will be dated around the 25th or 26th of August. And we'll put it on the 4SD website, because it's the narrative that's the groundwork for what I call rising to the COVID ready challenge. And I'm going to use the language of a campaign, but it's more than a campaign. It's about the collective capacity of humanity to rise to the COVID ready challenge. We start by saying this is a series of disease outbreaks. We stress to each other that it's caused by a dangerous virus. We remind each other that this virus is not going away. We tell each other that there's a lot more to be learned, but we say to each other, we can get ahead of this because we're human. And as we get ahead of this, we'll get ahead of so many other challenges because we will feel the power and the strength that comes from working together. So that starting point is recognizing the nature of the threat, but also feeling the strength that comes from being human and being able to deal with issues together. Our second heading, as we rise to the challenge, will be reiterating the 7 points of strategy. When we put the narrative up on the website in the next 24 hours, I'm going to share with you something that my colleague Catherine has done, which is a slide set. And you'll see on the slide set that we talk about the 7 strategic principles of the response. And they will come out in the slides, and I think they will be helpful to you. And we really want to share them. They're based on the WHO strategic principles, but they are given a little bit of extra push. And I hope that those of you who are designers and animators will take these strategic principles and will share them widely, a bit like what happened with the Sustainable Development Goals, with those icons that were so useful in putting them together. At the centre of it, this wheel icon that I wear. I'll just give you the shorthand for each one. Number one, universal precautions everywhere. If masks are a good idea, wear masks. If physical distancing is a good idea, do it. If hygiene is needed, do it. If staying at home when you're sick is the right thing to do it. Just keeping the focus on those universal precautions so they are drummed in like a drill. That's number one. Number two is invest in public health, community-based, local level public health. What we forgot about, particularly in Western Europe and the US, because we thought that these infectious diseases had basically gone. So we forgot about the need to look out for contagion. We forgot about the need for neighbourhood health watches. Let's get the public health services right. Number two. Number three, integrated, local level working. The stress is on integration. The stress is on local. And we've seen how centralized approaches using centralized biosecurity centers and so on don't work. You've got to get local. You've got to bring the local actors together. And we talked about that in these briefings. And it's the ability to bring together, to convene, to energize, and to create strong relationships between local actors. That's key. So our number three, integrated local action. Number four, keep those essential health services going. And we'll keep going on about the importance of services for women, services for children, services for disabled people, services for older people, services for people with cancer, services for people with heart disease and blood pressure. Keep those services going. Don't stop them because of COVID. How many of us know people who've had hospital appointments postponed or cancelled because of COVID? We've got to get through that. How many people have been in a situation where you needed access to a public toilet, but all the public toilets have been shut because of COVID? We must move beyond that, of basically undermining local services, undermining hospital services because of COVID. So keep essential health and other services going, number four. Number five, protect all those who provide care. Stop skimping on the PPE for health workers. Stop making health workers work without proper gowns. Number six, communicate clearly and consistently. I'm trying it. I'm trying so hard now. Stop hedging. Be clear. If we don't know something, we say we don't know it. But if we do know something, we've got to say it clearly. We must get the narratives right. Lockdown is not the answer. Instead, we've got to learn to live with the virus without lockdown. It's my new catchphrase, and I'm starting from that. Again, taking my cue from WHO, that it's so important. You can't keep the world in lockdown. It's just not on. And number seven, develop performance indicators and good dashboards and demonstrate the performance in public everywhere. These are our 7 strategic principles. This is what we've been talking about. And we've got a dashboard that's been developed by our colleague, Gail Fisher, in Singapore, which turns out to be really good and which breaks through this current mess we're in with people simply making decisions on the basis of case numbers, because case numbers aren't enough. You need to know, if you've got cases, can you stop clusters from developing and can you deal with them? And then within this, we get down to the leadership principles. Again, in Catherine's slides, she brings out 4 points. The heading is, the virus is the problem and people are the solution. A point that John has been making, John in our team, he's been making again and again. People are the solution because the virus is the problem. If only all of us could be saying that all the time, we'd stop stigmatizing people and we'd give them praise. We'd stop being unpleasant about a country that says we've got a spike in a particular northeastern territory, we'd say, no, great, brilliant. You've studied it, you've been clear about it, you've talked about it. This is the way to behave, because the people are the solution, the virus is the problem. So let's focus on the problem and demonstrate how the people are solving it. And then inside we do these 4 things. The things that we really want of everybody. Detective work, number 1. Cluster busting, number 2. Including everybody in the response, number 3. And ensuring meaningful connection and trust at interfaces, number 4. Everywhere I look, I see examples of the virus breaking through because people are not organized because of mistrust at interfaces between different local authority bodies, between business and government, between civil society and business, or between nations and between different nations, reflecting in disputes in places like the World Health Organization. Working on building trust at interfaces is the most important thing we can do if we want to stop this virus breaking through. So these characteristics of human behavior, making sure that the virus is the problem and people are the solution, are absolutely at the center. And so that leads us to trying to think through, well, what are we going to do in this situation as we've got this challenge of helping the world get COVID ready and do it quickly? How are we going to do it? And so at the end of last week, Catherine and I spoke with the leaders of campaigning in a number of different non-governmental groups in Britain. I want now to try to connect with the leaders of campaigning of every institution everywhere, because I actually think the only way we will collectively advance with the COVID-ready challenge everywhere is through a global campaign. A global campaign on the comprehensive precautions, a global campaign on public health everywhere, a global campaign on keeping essential health services going for everyone, a global campaign on tackling COVID inequity, a global campaign on publicly available dashboards so that we all know what's going on, and a global campaign on equity. Equity on protective equipment, equity on diagnostics, equity on treatment, and equity on vaccines. We will be able to make sense of this if our leaders come together, if our institutions align, and if we have the common language of a global campaign. Then we can do the great leap forward together. So we're not going to give up. We'd love to work with you on this. We'd love you to be part of it. We're posting our materials over the next day or two. But just inside this, as I finish my opening remarks and stimulate you to make some comments, I want to say I'm really pleased with the way in which the World Health Organization has battled on to develop the beginnings of a system for equitable access to vaccines. With all these bits of news about vaccines coming here and there, and with different governments forming bilateral relationships with different vaccine manufacturers, I'm so glad that 172 countries have signed on to WHO's global vaccine development program that's designed to help everybody to have access to a vaccine at a reasonable price, simply because you just can't leave it to the rich countries to look after themselves, with the rest of the world fending for themselves, just getting the crumbs from the plate. A proper system to get vaccines to everybody really matters. And the COVAX facility, as part of the ACT Accelerator, it's been developed by WHO, is great. And Tedros basically said last week, vaccine nationalism, where each country does everything it can to shore up its own vaccine supplies for its people, just creates a totally unfair world. Just a couple of other things that WHO has done. It said that plasma from recovered patients can be used. In fact, this has always been an age-old approach to dealing with tricky virus diseases. We did it on Ebola with something called ZMapp, as I said last week. And it's been done, and it has been done for some weeks now on COVID. Been done in India, been in other East Asian countries. And it's been done in the US and elsewhere. There's no magic about plasma from recovered patients. Anybody who's studied it knows that you're hugely dependent on what you get from your recovered patients. You have to fractionate the plasma. And there's all sorts of stuff in there. And you've got to sort it out. So it's expensive. But it can work. There's no magic. It's not something, frankly, to make a big fuss about. And to be pushing regulators to bend their rules is a very uncool thing for anybody in power to do. We've got to keep the rules of trying to make sure that medicines, vaccines, all other treatments are safe. And so let's keep that up and let's stop this business of political leaders forcing those who are regulators to bend their rules. In the long run, it won't work. There'll be tears, especially if you get an unsafe product that's then taken on by people and causes suffering and causes death. We don't want that. So no, we have to be absolutely uncompromising about this sort of thing. I've mentioned the face mask guidance and the fact that that's changed. I think it's important to hold on to that. I think we need the precautionary principle. I think schools are such a difficult area. We talked about those. I want everybody doing everything possible to keep schools safe. Better to start with high precautions and then to reduce them than to start light, end up with a problem like they've got in South Korea, and then have to reimpose discipline. I want to say that this business about reciprocation between countries on quarantine is very disturbing. I don't think it's the right way to go about it. This is not politics. This is not competition. It's a time for working together. So let's try to get some more streamlined agreement about the kind of variables we're going to look at between countries when deciding whether people can travel and reduce this terrible mess. All it's doing is confusing people, and it's contributing to total destruction of the travel industry and lots of people losing their jobs. I don't like the quarantine lottery that is going on right now. And let's just do one last thing. Let's do everything we can to try to make certain that we get the equity dimension right. I've mentioned to you before that we're doing work on what happens in cold factories where workers, often low paid, are working incredibly hard on long shifts to try to earn a decent living, processing raw food, might be meat, might be fish, might be vegetables, or they might be going further and making sandwiches or producing other cold goods. There is something about these cold factories between 4 degrees and 10 degrees centigrade that makes them really dangerous for COVID transmission. We know it, we're getting all the evidence, it's coming in thick and fast. We don't know for sure what the precise factors are, but we believe that it's really important that employers, employees, governments and consumers work together on this, because it is important that consumers say as loudly as they can, we don't want the health and safety of workers to be endangered for the sake of giving us access to low-cost, fresh meat, fish, sandwiches, vegetables, or whatever else. Instead, we should say, we'll pay what is necessary for them to be safe and healthy. Cheapness is not an excuse for forcing the workers to have to put up with conditions that can endanger their health and can endanger the health of their elderly relatives who might have concomitant disease. So when COVID is brought home, might just have very little chance of survival. So let's keep the focus on workers being safe, especially in these precious industries like food production. Those are my opening remarks. And I'd like quickly to just invite members of the team, as we customarily do in the middle, just to make any remarks or two on issues that they'd like. First of all, it's Twee on the poll results. And then I just want to invite other members of the team who are working on these various things that I've talked about, if there are things that I've said they want to embellish, to do so. And then I'm going to come quite quickly to Scott Knox and to Terry Jackson early on. I'm very keen to hear from you. And there are others who have been on before, who I want to give you space to, if we can do it quickly. And there are others who've not been on before. And if you're a newcomer and you would like to just introduce yourself, now's the chance. The only rule is don't talk for more than about a minute when you have the mic. Otherwise, I have to stop you and it feels nasty. Okay, Twee, you have the floor. Poll results, please.
Thank you. So you should be able to see them on your screen now. We're always really happy to see the spread of participants from across different continents. And because of the time zone, we don't expect too many from certain parts of the world. We're super happy to see today we have people from all age ranges and 7 from under 30, which was usually our gap from the beginning and early in the series. And then for the last question on how we're feeling today, really good to see that the majority is really positive. As usual, optimism and hopefulness leads the way, but great to also see some joy, appreciation, enthusiasm there. And then as usual in the situation, a few other more negative feelings and 3 people there on the very final one on insecurity and guilt. And at this point, I'll invite you, if you want to join to keep the conversation going with other people in this network on this open online briefing, I've set up a LinkedIn private group where you can keep the conversation going, and feel free, you can share anything you want, share how you're feeling. So if you would like to join that group, feel free to send me a message and I will invite you to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Twee. What we're trying to do here is to generate a sense of solidarity and power among our group, because the scale of the task is so huge. Twee, in her remarks, is contributing to that, and I want to ask you, please, link together as much as you can. Scott Knox, please, I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you, David. It was just to ask the question. I was on a call this morning with...
Messed up my...
So yeah, thank you, David. This morning I was on a call with the equivalent associations that represent marketing and advertising industry across the world, catching up on what was going on. And my colleague in New Zealand was reporting about the outbreak in Auckland. And there seems to be a lot of media confusion, unsurprisingly, around that outbreak. And I wonder if you could shed any light on that. They seem to feel that the strain of the virus that's causing the problem, the over 100 cases in Auckland, is not actually being found elsewhere in the country, which is causing a bit of a concern, particularly not being found in the quarantine facilities they've got set up at port of entry. There is a story emerging, and you may have already answered this by talking about the 4 to 10 degree food places, manufacturing places, but there is a concern that actually this outbreak may have come in via frozen food imports, is a story that's starting to build. And I just wonder if you could shed any light on that, or if that makes any sense to you at all.
Thank you very much indeed, Scott. I am talking to colleagues in New Zealand, and in fact, we have an exchange very early tomorrow morning on this. I think we just need to acknowledge that the majority mode of spread is definitely through droplet transmission, person to person. There remains a possibility of transmission through virus on surfaces. And those surfaces tend to hold the virus for longer if they're cold. And this does mean that theoretically it's possible for virus to be transmitted on cold food and possibly even on frozen food. We cannot discount it. I'm not prepared to say it's not possible. I am saying it's unlikely. But the way in which the possibility of cold food or frozen food will be implicated is precisely through the methodology that you've identified, that the genetic fingerprint of a new virus will be found to be different from that that's circulating among the population in the local area. And so we are going to have to say, in response to what your colleague in Auckland has said to you, that this is possible. I just don't know whether it is likely, and I certainly don't know whether it's the case. And I think it's absolutely right that we should keep an open mind as to the possibility that some instances of this virus may be as a result of it sticking around on the surface, for example, of a packet of food that's kept cold. And I just have to ask you to hold on to it. I mean, it certainly means that I think we ought to be cautious about cleaning cold food. I've thought that for some time, but I think we have to hold on to this possibility and factor it in. The second one I want you to hold on to, Scott, is the possibility that in certain settings, the virus can be picked up by air currents in tiny particles and become airborne. And I don't think it's common, but I do think it happens sometimes in particular forms of ventilation or in particular situations where people shout very loudly. I hate leaving you with things of uncertainty, Scott, and I think for you, somebody who's involved in the communications sector, you don't want uncertainty, but because in this particular meeting, I want to be honest and I want to express what I'm thinking and feeling, I'm telling you that I believe that there is a possibility that in some cases virus can be transmitted on cold surfaces, which could include cold packaging of food. If you want to come back, Scott, please come back now.
I know that I don't worry at all about the clarification. I know that a lot of people think the advertising industry is full of clarity. I would doubt that on most occasions. But no, just getting your general thoughts on this, because I said I'd go back to my colleague in New Zealand and just say, and I think for a lot of people in different countries, a lot of this is you see one news story somewhere, somebody report elsewhere, then you look to social media and the whole thing just blows up into a bigger conversation. So I just wanted to, because my connection with this group, just to give them one or two nuggets. I wasn't going to be able to tell them the full facts, and I don't think as we're learning about this, as you keep saying, clarity is not something we can always get to. So I completely understand, but thank you for the comments.
Thank you, Scott. Really, really lovely to talk to you. I mean, Scott, you're a delight, and it's been so good that we've been together on and off now for, I think, 3 or 4 months on this, and I'm so grateful to Richard Edelman for introducing us. And don't hesitate any time to just tell me how you think we can be a little bit more penetrating with what we're trying to suggest, knowing that at the same time we're dealing with some of the most extraordinary political forces that are ranged against us. Now, our colleague Twee said that in New Zealand, from her contacts, frozen food is ruled out as the source of the latest spike. Those sources still unknown and the investigation continues. Twee, are you okay with my response to Scott, or do you want to say anything?
No, that sounds right. I think you can never be 100% sure, but you do the best that you can in these situations.
Thank you. I'll keep everybody posted. I'd like to go to, well, to 2 people really. I've said to Terry Jackson, so Terry, I'm going to ask you if you could unmute and speak. And then I want to go to Sally Smith after Terry. So Terry, let's try and see if we can hear you now.
Are you going to ask me some questions?
Well, Terry, you've written to me, so I can do it this way. You've written to me saying, is anyone engaged in the conversation about social prescribing, i.e. community referrals, and if there's a role for GPs, patient participant groups in the front line of health service provision. So you're quite interested in the whole concept of social prescribing.
Oh, definitely, and I'd like your view on that.
That you're also interested in this dashboard idea, and you've been, you posted a link to the Cambridgeshire dashboard, and you might be prepared to speak about that. I didn't want to push you in one direction or the other, and also I want to keep you, ask you to be really brief. But I'm super interested in these dashboards. I think they're the secret of the future. I can't look at your link because it's too difficult while I'm talking. But I'd love it if you could just talk a bit about either or both.
Yeah, sure. Cottenham, just north of Cambridge, has a community interest company, non-profit. And it just so happens that there's a couple of guys there who can get their heads around geospatial data. And we just recently had the launch of the Geospatial Commission. It's taken years for it to come good, but it has come good. And it's going to see an awful lot of activity around creation of dashboards and representation of geographic data and in fact geotemporal data, because if you marry the two up, the where and the when, you have a whole new angle on the web. And I've got to give credit where credit's due. It's the guys at the university in Baltimore that have made the running on this, and they're doing some incredible things. I'll see if I can drop a link to them in the chat in a moment. So that's and of course the thing there is data. Data is the new gold, and it needs to flow, and it needs to flow freely. And it also needs to get down to community level. At the moment, PHE and NHSX and ONS are delivering it down to, I think it's county level, and some a bit closer, but they're not getting down to parish level, which is where that data needs to go. And data, of course, can be manipulated to paint a picture of what's going on locally, not only in terms of COVID-19, but also other stuff of interest to community groups. What was the other question?
Well, that's a great start, because I mean, it's great that you're linking together geocoding and time. We all talk back using our own experiences. Mine very much influenced by my time working on Ebola in West Africa. We were able to geocode data. We were helped by an outfit called ESRI, who were implanted people into WHO. But once you got geocoding and you were able to get time, suddenly you could actually trace what was happening. And so
absolutely.
to agree with you totally, Terry.
Sure.
Secondly, just to be very quick, on social prescribing, I just think that this COVID has taught us that GPs have to be as well locked into the social fabric of the communities in which they are. We have to reinvent community. And in countries that have rather systematically damaged community, that reinvention is not going to be an easy task, but it's got to be done. So those are my couple of comments. Back to you.
Okay, well, what you're saying is absolute music to my ears, because that's the direction I think we're all going. There is another group called Open Data Saves Lives, which is organized by the Open Data Institute, which also says an awful lot. And that particular group is focused on COVID-19 and the future. And all this, of course, stands us in good stead for the effects of climate change.
Totally. There we go.
So this is almost like a rehearsal for that, which is going to be far more serious as it goes along. And we've already done some mapping that projects the sea level rises in East Anglia over the next 100 years to show people that their kids are going to be growing up and facing these impacts and need to make provision for it through adaptation. So I'm through now.
Thank you. Well, I just want you to keep stressing these points. You know, we are the climate, we are COVID, we are living it now. It's never useful to use the future tense, but I agree with you. I just did, and you just did. But the reality is we've got to get on top of it. Now, I've got various people who would love to say a word or two. We will slip around a bit. The first one will be going in to a rather specific issue of singing. What is the most recent evidence of transmission risks from singing? I'm going to ask Catherine if she wants to talk about it, because we did do some work looking at choirs, and we know that there's been some guidance that's come through recently. We are still slightly unsure as to whether or not singing itself is the risk factor, or whether very, very high pressure kind of emission of air and droplets from the lungs is the problem, whether it's singing or shouting or any other form of extremely loud noise is the thing that drives the thing. But Catherine, just Sally Smith is there. You can see her there. Sally, if you want to say anything, you could by all means come in and make your point. I'd love it if you could. And then Catherine, could you comment? Sally, there you are, demute.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I think there's two issues around choirs. There's both the local community choirs, many of whom are very elderly people who meet in buildings that are quite small, and they're all starting to start up again for the winter season and asking for advice. But secondly, it's around singing in places of worship. And I think there are two things about that. First of all, that there are many churches, particularly in Africa, who feel that there, and I think it also applies to the Islamic community, but there's less singing in Islamic communities, but that they feel that it's a punishment of their religious freedom being asked to close down, and are advocating with governments to open up. And I think looking at some of the scientific research behind this will be important. One other point, just going back to Terry's point on mapping, the faith community for about 30 years have asked us to do geospatial mapping of their service delivery outlets in order to be accredited with the services they provide. In the last 2 or 3 years, they've asked not to be on geospatial mapping because they are now a target for terrorism. And I think that was just an interesting reflection on what Terry was saying about mapping, that there's no protection for health services, be they faith or otherwise.
Thank you very much indeed. I had the same comment to me from the former president of Médecins Sans Frontières, who was saying, yes, we do coordinates because we send to all sides in wars coordinates of our hospitals, hoping they won't bomb us. And we've just realized that actually they then get fed into their artillery and they explicitly target us. It's absolutely terrible. Sally, thank you for making the point that there's a double-edged sword here. Thank you also for stressing that there are many people in religion who are feeling that there are aspects of COVID guidance that are discriminatory. And we really have to be more thoughtful and clever with our guidance. Nobody wants any group, particularly people who are worshipping, to feel that somehow there is something against them in the guidance we're offering. It's the other way around. So I'm so glad you pointed that out. Lastly, Catherine, what are you going to say to Sally on your understanding of the guidance? Sorry. Okay. No, we have the microphone issue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Off you go.
No, I was just going to say, Sally, that David and I were talking earlier this week, maybe the end of last week, and one of the newest pieces of evidence is that it's not the singing per se, it's the volume at which one is singing. And that has to do with the aspirin and whether or not basically how much, to be less delicate, how much saliva is being expelled when one sings. So I actually had a phone call quickly with a dear friend of mine who was in the sort of lower ranks of opera singing for most of her career. And she said opera singing, they're mostly unmiked and they're in these open air theaters. And she said that there's so much saliva that it's really a problem in that venue, and they're so loud. But I think if that's really a sort of volume to saliva ratio that you're looking at.
Thank you, Catherine. We've got 3 or 4 people on this call that I really want to bring in, and I've not looked at my screen because I've been trying to look at the camera, and I've suddenly seen names. I'd like to say your name, and if you feel like it, could you just give what's on your mind, to the top of head, sharing with the group. Kim Pullman, you've been talking to me about performance, you know, the absolute mess of the performing arts at the moment. You talked to me about fellow cellists like yourself or other performers who've just really felt totally decimated by this. I believe it is our job in public health to be able to find solutions that enable you who are in the whole performance sector, and particularly in music, we've got to enable you to go on doing it. Are you seeing any signs that we are tuning to your needs, or are you still feeling utterly discriminated against?
Well, David, thank you for inviting me to comment. I should qualify that I'm an amateur musician, so I obviously from a professional viewpoint, I'm not implicated in this, but I am close to several artists who are suffering seriously from this situation, and they are representative of the whole community. I do know that there are some groups, I'm only really familiar with London, but some of the theaters, some of the concert halls are experimenting with small groups and different kinds of presentations. The recent months, there's been a lot of experimentation by ballet companies, jazz clubs to broadcast, excuse me, online, also in the United States, excuse me. So I don't, it's just a world that it needs an audience. The artists need to create and perform, so it's very, very difficult to find solutions until this is over.
But I'm going to insist that it is my view that we have to help you find solutions, even though it's still going on, because we don't know when it's going to be over. And yes, you're a brilliant amateur cellist, but when we were together a few weeks ago, I think your remark to me about just how bad this is for musicians and how many of your fellow musicians, particularly those who depend on this for their income, are in real difficulty, just struck with me. Thank you, Kim, for speaking out. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. I'd like to go, if I can find him, to Mike Sanders. Mike, you came on one of our briefings recently and we talked to you about Leicestershire. And I know how hard you've been working on integrated local responses. I know how hard you've been working on bringing different elements of communities together and trying to do it in ways that reduce stigma and discrimination. What does it feel like, Mike, particularly as there's been this rather big upheaval in the future of Public Health England, on which you might have a view?
Yes, indeed. The best comment on that is, and apologies for World War II reference that might lose it, but it was akin to the day after the little ships evacuated the British Army from Dunkirk. And it's akin to Churchill not saying, we shall fight them on the beaches, we shall, etc., but instead giving a speech that says, I know, we're going to reorganise the army. And I think it says everything about how can a reorganisation play any useful role at this time in actually helping combat COVID. One from me, which if I may, David, I just put in the question there, is I'm particularly interested in sharing good practice around changing people's behaviours. So we talked about factories, but the issue for me, as you know, is behaviours outside the factory gate on the way to work. I don't think the issue is within school, it's behaviours within the common room or at the school gate. I don't think the issue is behaviours in the care home. I think the issue is the behaviours of poorly paid agency staff outside the school gate. So in the midst of all this conversation about quarantines and regulations and reorganisation, this is a study of human behaviour, and there is something about getting situations to understand they are responsible for their workers and their staff. It doesn't just end at the school and the factory gate, and I'd love to maybe come back another time to a conversation around best practice in doing that.
So first of all, Mike, you are so welcome anytime. I know how deftly, trying to find the word, deftly, you are managing multiple forces in the work that you're doing. I also know how delicate the situation is in Britain as the nation tries to find ways to get local action to do with spikes in order to prevent a major upsurge. Thanks again for all you're doing. We'd like you to come on. Please don't hesitate to tell us in advance if you can join, because I'd like to bring you in early. I'd also like to bring in James Ritchie from the International Union of Food and Allied Workers. James, right early on, saw that there was a problem among those working in cold food processing plants, particularly meat, fish, vegetables, and also things like sandwich making and so on. James, how does it look? You've been working at this now for some months. Do you feel you're getting some traction? Are people listening to you? Do you think you're able to get your members as involved as you'd like them to be in a collective effort to reduce COVID threats in the food sectors that you're involved with your huge union alliance, which goes all over the world?
Yes, hello, David. Thank you for inviting me to comment, and greetings to everyone, wherever you may be. We've certainly got our members focused on the risks in food processing, and particularly meat and poultry and fish processing, but it's trying to get the attention of regulators and employers in a concerted way to be able to minimise those risks. And I think, you know, there was questions before about, I saw on the chat, about whether or not facilities or factories should close after a certain number of COVID-19 infections being identified. And I don't think that's quite the right question. The factory should be made safe. And if the factory needs to close, while the workers through their union and the employers negotiate appropriate safety measures, then it should do so. If it doesn't have to close while those appropriate safety measures are negotiated and implemented, well, then it shouldn't close. So the key thing is systematic safety measures put in place, and we know a lot more now about what makes workers safe at work than we did back in March or April. So we're learning all the time, we're implementing measures, we're trying to get the attention of regulators. It's very important to have strong regulation for the workplace, which is not the case in many parts of the world. I would say most parts of the world there is not strong regulation for the workplace. So that's one fight, and the other fight is to negotiate with employers to implement safety measures about what is known, so that workers can be protected. And the point that we've discussed so often, David, to make sure that there is appropriate income support, there's appropriate sick leave in place, so workers are not forced by economic pressure to come to work when they should be isolating or when they're sick, which risks everybody else in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, James. James, I saw Mike dealing with his problems, which include some food plants in Leicestershire, nodding his head strongly in agreement when you said you've got to have ways to prevent there being incentives for workers to work when they're sick. I think this is so massively important all over the world. And yet, when you're working where Rojan is in Nepal or where NK Seti is in New Delhi, it's super hard to do this. And now, just as we reach the end, I know I've gone over time. I think there's a Henk on my screen. If that is Henk Beckerdam, Can I just see you? Henk, is that Henk Bekkerdam?
Yes, it is.
Henk Bekkerdam. He worked with me on SARS in China in 2003. He's worked with me on numerous issues over the years all over the world. He has just finished his tour of duty in India as the WHO representative in India. He's watching the numbers in New Delhi. Henk, as we close, are you seeing, as I am seeing, really amazing work going on in India? And who would you particularly like to give a shout out to as you watch what's happening in that great country that you and I love so much?
I think it's difficult to say. It's for sure true. One thing you have to realize when you look at a country like India, you don't look at one epicurve. You look at 700 districts where you have to follow, and even in smaller regional areas where you see what the challenges are. What I'm at least quite proud of India, how they have been able to scale up the testing. They started with 500 a day, and they are able to do now more than 1 million. I think they're even planning further. Now, that I'm very enthusiastic about, that they have been able to take on some of the challenges, even though the numbers are at this very moment very high, but I've seen that they have been able to mobilize. And I think I would like also to reflect on what India has done with the polio. Nobody thought that polio could be beaten in India. India did it. And I think here a few things are very important. And these are some of the lessons that I'm still fascinated about in this work in infectious diseases. Prevention is the best. We need to start investing in public health. You need to make sure that you have mechanisms that you know actually what's going on. Yeah. Even though the numbers are very large, but India has also a large community who can be mobilized. And I think that's what I have seen. They bought some time. The numbers were low to first of all. And we're very proud that India took it very seriously from the onset, meaning already from mid-January. And that's given us some time to deal now better what's going on, even though the numbers are very high.
Yeah, but India's a huge country, Henk, and I'm so pleased to hear your positive feelings. Thank you. Sarah Phillips's daughter, Sophie, gets a special shout out from us. Sarah's a regular, Sophie's super strong, and somehow she won and the tree lost. Sophie, hope you're okay. Just a big, big greeting to Joe Nichols. I saw you were in the chat. Joe, working in Kenya and really keeping an eye on what's happening, not just in Kenya, but also in neighbouring countries and particularly Somalia. But I've just seen on my screen that Tip O'Neill is here. Tip, it's just an absolute delight to see you wearing a lovely, I can see you wearing a striped shirt, I think it is. Tip, tell me where you are, what you're seeing. I think you will have the last word, and just great that you've joined us. Over to you, Tip.
Thank you, David. I'm in Philadelphia, right off of Independence Mall in Pennsylvania in the USA. As you know, we're in the international distribution of fertilizers, and I've been following your activities from April and now decided to join the weekly conferences. I'm really excited that you're going to run a campaign, and I ask you and entice you to think about public-private partnerships with the business community. Those of us in the business community are very interested in worker safety. We need guidance. We need guidance on an international level. Your points about local politics causing issues. Sitting where I am in the United States, I understand your challenges fully, but this too will resolve itself. In the meantime, we're looking for your leadership, and certainly we'd like to talk to you about how we can get some business associations also engaged, like you mentioned the leader of the labor union. We absolutely, business associations like IFA would be happy to join your effort.
Tip, thank you. We're so pleased with the way in which members of the International Fertilizer Association, your group, have been rising to the challenge of COVID. I don't want to mention individual companies, but they're people that you and I know who are taking leadership roles. Secondly, I'm delighted that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the World Economic Forum, and the Consumer Goods Forum are right up in the lead. Thirdly, It's just such a delight to see you there with your leadership and helping to steady the ship in the United States, because it's going to be a tough run and legislators have such an important role. So it's wonderful to see you again. Before we close, I would like to just give super shout out to Rebecca Cantor, calling in from Chile. I'm watching what's happening in Chile, and I think it's so important about the way in which people and government are working together. And it does seem as though you've managed to come through some very difficult political stages. I hope it's okay, Rebecca, and please put me right if I'm wrong. And then NK Seti, real greetings to you. Carlos and Veronica are coming in from Cancun in Mexico. Absolute delight to see you. Shafiqul Islam, thank you again for connecting. Godfrey from Tanzania, I know your microphone isn't working, you couldn't join. It's so lovely to be with you. And Abdullah Udrago, it's so good that you're here. Thank you for sparing the time. Sorry we can't bring everybody in. Don't hesitate to write to me or write to tweet. Here's the picture from Chris. Lovely and beautiful colors, making the point. We will put this along with the video on our website. It will be there as quick as we can make it. And let's keep this going, because as Tip said, we've all got to be in it together. And if we can, we'll get on top of it. Don't be put off by this and that political difficulty. This is beyond politics. This is the future of the world. Thanks, everybody. And with that, I say to the team, thank you. And perhaps if as many members of the team could unmute their microphones at the same time, we will say bye-bye to everybody from the team. 1, 2, 3. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day, y'all.
Good to see you all. Really good to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.